Welcome everybody. My name is Marie Morandi. I'm the dietitian here at Lynn Cancer Institute. Our topic today is let's talk sugar. This very common question that we get here at the Cancer Center. And there's a lot of confusion out on the internet as far as what is a good and bad choice. So our goals today is to gain a perspective on carbohydrates and cancer. Understand the research, understand the appropriate carbohydrate choices and options that we have, and the influence of lifestyle. So I like this quote because I think it brings home the complexity of cancer itself. The quote is, carcinogenesis, which is the development of cancer, is a complex process involving multiple sequential mutations which occur randomly in the DNA of normal cells over many years, even decades, until finally specific genes are mutated and cell growth becomes out of control, resulting in the full neoplastic phenotype and other metastases. So basically what this is saying is that it takes a lot of damage to DNA, and which can occur at random times, for that cell to become a cancerous cell that grows quickly. If you think of it that way, if you think of this as a process of mutations and overgrowth, sugar isn't what causes cancer or allows it to continue to grow. And certainly we can't cure cancer by not eating sugar, which is a common statement by people out in the industry or internet sites that you may go to, or even books. There are multiple factors that are involved in causing cancer. As that quote said, it takes multiple sequences of damage to the DNA in specific important genes that allow that cancerous cell to form and start growing. So many of the foods that we know help to fight cancer have naturally occurring sugar. So we don't necessarily want to make all foods with sugar evil in this sense, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about types of sugar, okay? And sugar is a very simplified term, okay? You're gonna have complex carbohydrates, fibers, and sugars, okay? So just to kind of keep using that same terminology, we're gonna talk about types of sugars. Now, we're gonna start with simple sugars, okay? Simple sugars will raise blood sugar quickly, okay? Because they require less digestion. Often, but not always, they are highly processed, which also means they're nutritionally depleted. Meaning, if you take a cane sugar from naturally occurring cane and you make it into white powdered sugar, there's a lot of processing going on, drying, bleaching, depleting, to make that end product. And all of that processing takes nutrients out of that naturally occurring sugar. I say often because part of the sugar that's in fruit, in sugar in honey, sugar in pure maple syrup, molasses, are simple certainly, but they contain a lot of important nutrients that may help boost our immune system, give us vitamins and minerals that our bodies need, and nutrients that may even help fight cancer. So the idea, yes, is to limit added sugar, as they are most likely the most processed simple sugars, okay? So when we're looking at labels, and I highly recommend everybody to look at ingredient lists. Looking at the nutrition facts label is a nice snapshot. It gives you some important information like how much fat and protein and salt and all that kind of stuff is in a product, and you should look at that. But I spend a lot of time reading ingredient lists, okay? The first few, 3, 4, 5 ingredients are gonna be your most dense in that product. And what is going into the things that you are eating. You want to look for brown sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar, invert sugar, anything ending with cane in the word or ose, so cane crystals, sugar, evaporated cane juice, dextrose, glucose, sucrose. All of those are simple processed sugars. Anything with syrup in the name, high fructose corn syrup, which gets a lot of press, not the best of things to be putting into food, certainly. Corn syrup, same thing, malt syrup, brown rice syrup. So all those sugars are just adding in processed, simple sugars that are not going to be nutrient rich and helpful to our bodies. So the simple sugars that are of value, that can help us, are fruit sugars. Okay, so generally fruit is a wonderful mix, complex sugars and simple sugars. They're loaded with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants that help to fight cancer. Okay, for example, anthocyanins in a blueberry, okay, is antioxidants that help to fight cancer, reduce cancer growth, work as an antioxidant to prevent that damage to those cells. So certainly you wouldn't want to give up eating a blueberry because it's going to help fight your cancer. Oranges, same thing. Oranges will have simple sugars from the juice part, but they'll actually also have complex sugars from the membranes and the outside layerings. Vitamin C is super important. Most of us understand that as far as boosting our immune system. And certainly when we have an illness like this, cancer growth, we're trying to treat that cancer, you want to boost your immune system to help fight along with your chemo and along with your radiation. Now I will say, I never propose a person use nutrition only for treatment. Nutrition will not cure cancer, okay? But it is a complement. So anytime that we can fuel our bodies with these cancer-fighting foods, then you work along with synergistically that chemo or that radiation. So another example is honey. So most people would say, oh no, honey is sugar and I shouldn't be putting that in my food. However, honey, especially if you buy local, but either way, has a lot of immune boosting properties from the bees. So a lot of the immune factors that a bee develops will come through in the honey and give us those same nutrients. You also get iron from honey, which is interesting. Not everybody realizes that. So people who are anemic or not really, liking red meat at the time because of taste changes or something like that, they can get iron from honey. Along with cancer-fighting nutrients, some with a property similar to tamoxifen. So we've talked about that in some of our other classes, that they've done studies with honey where they have found that nutrients in honey can act very similar to that tamoxifen as far as fighting breast cancer. So certainly that would be a go-to sweetener if we needed one to add into our foods. Maple syrup, so pure maple syrup, not pancake syrup, which is sugar or high fructose corn syrup, but pure maple syrup is a good source of zinc. Zinc, again, kind of boosts the immune system and helps fuel our body appropriately. So these would be simple sugars of value, okay? Now, there's a lot of information in here and we'll kind of go through it. The idea is isocaloric but not isometabolic. What that means is sugar to sugar comparison, yes, they may all seem the same, but they don't act the same in the body, okay? So a lot of people talk about high fructose corn syrup and white sugar and a potato. Oh, well, I shouldn't eat potatoes because they're just going to break down to sugar just like everything else. Okay. High fructose corn syrup and white sugar, basically essentially the same. They're a 50-50 mixture of fructose and glucose. Okay. High fructose corn syrup being a little higher, but pretty close. So is high fructose corn syrup worse than sugar? They're both a problem, okay, in terms of the metabolic response. Why? High intakes of fructose, which you're getting from all that sugar or high fructose corn syrup, produces what's called ghrelin. And that's an I am hungry hormone, okay? It doesn't stimulate what's called leptin, which is I am full hormone. So when we eat foods with a lot of sugar added or sodas with a lot of high fructose corn syrup, or a lot of high fructose corn syrup added to, say, a snack bar or whatever, yogurt or something like that, then we don't actually shut down our appetite, okay? We continue to produce I'm hungry, which is certainly not a good thing for our weight management goals either. Sugar and high fructose corn syrup are metabolized differently than the sugar that you're going to get from a potato, for instance. Glucose from a potato, a complex carbohydrate, is metabolized by every cell of the body and produces that I am full leptin, okay, which is a good thing, and suppresses that I'm hungry hormone. So the sugar and cancer connection, I believe, is predominantly related to the vast amount of added sugars that we have put into our food supply. So compared to 30 years ago, we now eat about 75 pounds of sugar a year per person, compared to 40 pounds per year per person back then. This is a huge difference. And generally speaking, because of what has been added to our food supply, the products in the grocery store, fast food, and just this obsession that we seem to have with sugar. And I really do believe that the more sugar we eat, the more addicted we get. Just like any other drug or smoking or cigarette or whatever, we get addicted to sugar. Okay? So foods high in added sugar also equal extra calories and have that potential for adding to us being overweight or obese, which in and of itself will increase cancer risk. So that kind of is simple sugar difference and explanation. The other type of sugar is complex carbohydrates, which you'll hear a lot of, complex sugars, okay? Generally, the complex carbohydrates are foods that are high in fiber, okay? These are all the foods that we talk about and a lot of other people will talk about as far as being your cancer-fighting foods. Vegetables, spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, carrots, squash, Swiss chard. These are all high fiber foods and all foods with a lot of vitamins, minerals, plant-based nutrients, beta carotenes, alpha carotenes, carotenoids that help to fight cancer. Potatoes, corn, beans, peas, lentils, edamame. So often we hear not to eat a potato or don't eat corn or don't eat peas because they're starchy and sugary. However, if it's that versus some other kind of simple sugar-loaded food, I would eat those foods high in fiber. Certainly, the difference between a white potato and a sweet potato, if you think about the color difference, I do tend to still prefer a sweet potato over a white potato. Why? Because you're going to get more beta carotene, alpha carotene, all of those carotenoids, vitamin A, nutrients that help to fight cancer versus that white potato. So anything with the brightest of colors, you still want to choose. But whole grains, quinoa, whole fruit with the skins, but also mangoes and beets and carrots and celery and onions and shallots, you know, your apple, your pear, your oranges, your berries, all of these foods, even though they contain some sugars, are fiber rich and have a lot of nutrients that help fight cancer. Dates and parsnips, mushrooms. We talked about mushrooms in our Healthy Eating for Cancer Survivors class. And mushrooms have a lot of nutrients that have been studied that fight cancer, specifically related to its carbohydrates. So mushrooms cooked, very much I would recommend cooking your mushrooms, are a great thing to add into stir fries or soups, omelets, anything like that, specifically when you can find the Asian mushrooms. Shiitake mushroom, maitake mushroom, reishi mushroom. So those are your most nutrient dense when it comes to mushrooms. So all of these foods, not only because they're high in fiber, but because of the nutrient value, will actually help fight your cancer, certainly not stimulate the cancer growth, like many people say sugar feeds cancer. So that's certainly not. So why do we want complex carbohydrates? Because of the fiber, because of the types of carbohydrates in the food. So we talked about the types of carbohydrates in mushrooms specifically being related to fighting cancer. There's this concept of resistant starches. So even though something might have sugar, like a potato has sugars, sometimes in the way that you cook it, they form these resistant carbohydrates, which aren't as readily absorbed, which don't raise your blood sugar and your insulin levels. So for instance, if you're going to eat a white potato, cook it, cool it, and then reheat it, or eat it cold. So for instance, a light, low-fat potato salad might be a nice option when you have the craving, because it's been cooked and cooled, and then you consume it. More resistant starch is there, so it's not so much of an impact on our blood sugars. So because of the fiber and the carbohydrates in these types of foods, it takes longer to digest, okay? Slowing the digestion, slowing the rise in the blood sugars, and because the blood sugars don't rise as fast, you have less insulin that's produced, okay? Insulin is really the problem in all of these scenarios when it comes to research on sugars. Insulin is a growth factor. It's a growth hormone. It causes us to store fat, but it also stimulates growth, okay? It allows cells to take in sugar to give them fuel. So it can stimulate the growth of cancer cells just as much as it will a healthy, normal growing cell. So keeping it complex for better nutrition and less risk of that cancer. So sugar feeds every cell of the body. Every cell of our body needs glucose, okay? That is why any of these starchy foods are broken down to glucose. It is the fuel, okay? Some cancer cells have more insulin receptors on their cells so they can take up more glucose. Certainly that's a problem. Elevated insulin levels stimulate more cell growth. So sugar in the diet cannot be eliminated to stop cancer growth. But in addition to that, even if you did, the cancer cells themselves and our liver will make sugar. So even people who go on very strict diets, the body likes to stay in equilibrium. So if the body is not getting glucose from the outside, it'll break down our muscle and our fat stores to produce sugar. That's not kind of against the goal anyway. So there has been some research in the sugar-cancer connection. Most of the research points to people with diabetes or metabolic syndrome. People with diabetes are found at elevated risk for cancer, specifically liver, pancreas, endometrial, bladder, lymphoma, and breast and colorectal. Okay? Why? Diabetes causes that leptin, that I'm hungry hormone, I'm full hormone receptor to fail. So we don't shut down our appetites quite as well. Okay? Diabetes and obesity relate to metabolic syndrome, which is that insulin resistance, meaning for some reason the insulin doesn't connect to the receptor and get the glucose into the cells, so it just accumulates in the blood. Okay? This causes high insulin levels. The insulin itself accumulates in the blood along with that glucose, causes inflammation. Inflammation is always the baseline etiology for cancer, heart disease, stroke risk. Everything can kind of come back to this chronic inflammation. Increased estrogen levels, very interesting for breast cancer survivors, and directly increases cell proliferation and angiogenesis. So this high insulin levels, like I said, is really the issue. Sugar alone does not promote cancer. Certainly, I mentioned there's a lot of causes to cancer, okay? Being overweight or obese may be one of them. Viral may be one of them. Certainly, we all know that HPV is a factor in endometrial and head and neck cancers. Smoking is a big factor, obviously, for the damage that it causes to our bodies. Alcohol, chemicals, who knows, a lot of factors in there. So sugar alone does not promote cancer. First, diets high in sugar may lead to elevated blood sugar levels, which raise insulin levels. Routinely and chronically high levels of insulin, in turn, increase the risk of colon cancer, perhaps other cancers. And it's an indirect kind of chain of events, which is seen most commonly among people who are overweight and sedentary, or those who have insulin resistance or diabetes in their family. So another way that high sugar consumption may increase cancer risk is leading to that weight gain. So high sugar foods are typically high in calories. Over time, a high calorie diet leads to excessive weight, and excess weight is linked to those a greater risk of certain types of cancers. So not to say that you're off the hook and then sugar doesn't matter. It does matter what sugar that you are eating, but it's not the only factor in making a person's cancer grow. So people will ask, should I avoid all carbohydrates? Should I go on a ketogenic diet? Which you will find out on the internet all the time. Avoid sugar, ketogenic diet, Atkins, whatever. No. Okay. Although it may seem reasonable that very low carbohydrate, ketogenic type diets can help reduce the progress of some of these types of cancers, we don't have the evidence. Okay. We have a little bit of evidence when it comes to brain cancer. You may be a little bit of evidence when it comes to gastric cancers, but really the evidence isn't there. And I will tell you, it is a very difficult diet to follow. So more than likely, you could start off on this and you'll fail and you go back to normal. And you really wouldn't have developed any good habits. Why? Because my concern is that a ketogenic diet restricts not only your bad carbs, not only all those simple sugars and added sugars and syrups and all that kind of stuff, but it's going to limit those good carbs too. How often do people say, oh, I can't have carrots, or I can't have peas, or I can't have maybe even nuts because there's too much sugar in them, okay? So certainly you don't want to eliminate foods that have those nutrients that help fight cancer. So that's my concern when it comes to the ketogenic diets, is that you're going to eliminate both out of the diet. We do want to reduce added sugars, okay? A heart healthy eating, their recommendation is to reduce intake by 30 to 50%. Added sugars refer to the same simple sugars that we talked about, the cane sugars, the syrups, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, molasses, dextrose, all of those calorie-containing sweeteners that are in processed foods. So luckily enough, because I used to do this presentation and say it's really hard to know what is added and what is naturally occurring, thankfully our nutrition facts label is changing. And as you see the new nutrition facts label, under carbohydrates, you will see a line that says how many grams of added sugar, okay? Remember that when you're reading that label, you'll see total carbohydrates, 30 grams. Then you'll see under it fiber, sugar, alcohol, added sugars, or sugars, and then added sugars, okay? So that's kind of a breakdown of that 30 grams. So a lot of people get confused. But knowing how much added sugar, let's say you're looking at a yogurt. A yogurt's going to have a certain amount of naturally occurring sugar from the milk, okay? Usually it's about 10 to 12, depending on the size of the cup. But then if they add that corn syrup, or they add, regular sugar, then you might get up to 20-some grams of carbohydrates in that yogurt. And that's where you start reading the label. But soon that new label will also tell you, it's 8 grams of added sugar or 6 grams of added sugar or something like that. So you'll know. The goal for women, which we have here in the crowd, is 25 grams of added sugar. For your men, they get a little bit more, of course, 38 grams of added sugars. This, like I said, this does not include those naturally occurring sugars from the fruit or from that milk. So it's just what's added in. So now what? So for cancer patients, we can't stop eating sugar, okay? Like I said, the ketogenic diets don't have any evidence that they work best. We don't want to eliminate all of these good foods that have cancer-fighting nutrients. But you can make those smart choices with the carbohydrates that we do choose. Limit the simple sugars. Remember, vegetables, okay, fruit, whole grains, beans are the very foods that appear to fight cancer the best. So you don't want to eliminate those. Choose the complex carbohydrates. And, very importantly, pair those foods with a protein, a good source of protein, lean protein usually, a healthy fat. Anybody know the healthy fats? So basically your healthy fats are avocado, nuts, seeds, olives, olive oil, sesame seed oil, canola oil, forgetting your fatty fish. So those are healthy fats, and fiber, of course. Why? Because when we eat carbohydrates or sugars in combination with foods, other foods with protein and fat and fiber, then it slows down even further that digestive process, so we don't stimulate as much insulin. These things help reduce insulin produced by the body when we eat those carbohydrates. Okay, so I always like to speak about artificial sweeteners, okay? And I speak about the actual evidence when it comes to artificial sweeteners. A lot of people will say, I don't feel comfortable. It's artificial, it's chemical, it's processed. I don't want any of it. And I say, I understand. I understand completely. Saccharin, back in the 1970s, okay, was found to cause cancer in rats. So they put the little disclaimer on all of the little packages, and they say has been shown to cause cancer in rats. So everybody got afraid. But we are not rats, certainly. And we don't process saccharin the same. And this is what's interesting about the research process is, yes, they're going to start with petri dishes and cells and small animals, rats, and then they're going to get to humans. And then they're going to look at population studies of people who consume a lot of artificial sweeteners and people who don't. Okay, so we don't process saccharin the same. We don't get the same kind of metabolic chemicals breakdown that a rat will. So there's no clear evidence that saccharin causes cancer in humans. Okay, therefore, saccharin was delisted in 2000 from the U.S. National Toxicology Program report on carcinogens. It's no longer considered a carcinogen. Many people will still avoid, that's fine. Aspartame came out in 1981. It was found to be a safe artificial sweetener. Then people started noticing a rising increase in brain cancer. So that he said, oh, it must be from aspartame. Aspartame came out, now everybody's getting more brain cancers. So the National Institute of Health investigated the AARP Diet and Health Study, over 500,000 retirees. Increasing consumption of aspartame-containing beverages was not associated with the development of lymphoma, leukemia, or brain cancers. Okay. What are some other sweeteners? Stevia, I think, is the sweetener du jour right now. Splenda, kind of a question mark. There's been some reports not. What I always like to say is small amounts when needed, I think you can safely use. Certainly, sometimes if I have iced tea or something like that, I put half a packet of stevia in just to give it a little sweetness. But for the people who sit around and drink 6 cans of Diet Coke, or 10 cans, go through a 12-pack, something like that, or they'll put 3 packets of Sweet and Low into their drinks 3 or 4 times a day, I would say definitely that's too much from a couple of angles. Certainly it's a lot of chemicals they're putting in their system, but also it's a lot of sweetness. And like I said, when the more and more sweet our bodies get used to, the more and more we want. It increases sugar cravings, okay? The other thing they found with artificial sweeteners is there's this idea that, let's say you have a Diet Coke in the middle of the afternoon, okay? You're not eating anything, you're just drinking a Diet Coke, because everybody sometime in the middle of the afternoon gets that little craving. At least in my family they do. For a lot of people, what happens an hour later? An hour later, all of a sudden you find you're hungry. Why? Why am I hungry an hour later? Well, for one thing, that super sweetness that you got from the Diet Coke registered with your brain, ooh, this person's eating. So I'm going to tell the pancreas to release some insulin. The insulin comes out, drops your blood sugar because you didn't eat anything, and now you're hungry. So certainly not helping anybody as far as weight management goes. So that's my take on artificial sweeteners. I think there's a lot to do with lifestyle choices. And lifestyle choices, as we've spoken about in other classes, the way we eat, the foods that we choose really is not a diet. It's not a short-term kind of thing. It is a new lifestyle pattern. Stick with naturally occurring sugars, like that's what's found in fruit versus a processed sugar. So even if you're baking or doing some kind of extra recipe or something, whenever you can do a pureed fruit or honey or dates or something like that instead of table sugar, you get better nutrition from it. Avoid your concentrated sugars such as sodas and sugary drinks. I think that's probably the biggest key for a lot of people who are on this typical Western diet, okay? You can find a huge difference just by taking out all of that soda and sweet tea and lemonades and added sugars into those drinks. Because unfortunately that doesn't do anything. It doesn't tell us we're full, it doesn't shut down our appetite, and it's not even food that's filling our stomach, so avoid those concentrated sugars. 100% fruit juice is okay. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, I have my orange juice in the morning, or I'll have a little juice, something like that. 100% fruit juice is okay, small quantities still, because what happens is just the juice doesn't have that fiber. You may even lose some of the nutrients. For example, an apple, the quercetin as a plant-based nutrient that helps fight cancer is one of those. Quercetin is concentrated in the skin. So when you juice or you get an apple juice, you're losing that skin. So juicing a lot of things, you have the potential of losing nutrients. So about 6 ounces a day, once a day, something like that, unless you had a very high intake and you're just trying to cut back, but 1 time a day for 100% fruit juice. Treats, you can't give up treats completely, and why should you? A couple times a week, something like that. I try very hard in my family to keep to a weekend day and maybe Fridays as dessert day with my kids. So we have a couple times a week, something like that. When eating treats, consider your portion and be mindful. If you're having a special treat, don't just gobble it down and go off. Enjoy. Eat it slowly, taste the food, be mindful of what you're eating, because if it is a treat, then it needs to be a treat, and treat it like a treat. Have small portions. Maybe you even adjust some of your meals that night so that it works in those carbohydrates into a reasonable portion. Focus on healthy, unprocessed foods. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, seeds. Like I said often, there's a lot of nutrients, these polyphenols, these plant-based nutrients in foods that we're still discovering. So a lot of people will say, well, I'll take a polyphenol or a supplement, or I'll take the resveratrol or the anthocyanin pill or something like that. Or there's beta carotene in my multivitamin. But alpha carotene and gamma carotene are even more potent than beta carotene. So but if you rely on vitamins, you're not going to get all of the variety that you're going to find in foods. For instance, there's polyphenols, merogenin and nobletin, that help battle insulin resistance. But if you're not eating the whole food, the spinach and the citrus and those foods, then you wouldn't get those nutrients, because you're not going to find those nutrients in a little vitamin pill. Okay? So eat the whole unprocessed foods. When you need a small amount of sweetener, kind of like we've been talking about, use honey or pure maple syrup, coconut sugar, stevia, xylitol, dates or date sugar, pureed fruit. Okay? In fact, the recipe I gave you has a couple different recipes. The muffin recipe, there's no sugar in there. It uses bananas. Even it's not a banana muffin, and it actually doesn't really even taste like bananas. It's a berry muffin, but they use the mashed up banana as the sweetener. And you can do that with a lot of things. A lot of balls or little treats will use pureed dates mixed with something else. You could make a mix it with cocoa and chocolate and make like a little chocolate bar. You can mix it with nuts and walnuts for a little date walnut roll or something like that. So it can be just as sweet, just as satisfying with a whole food. In general, we want to replace saturated fats, fats from butters and high-fat meats, with healthy fats, including monounsaturated fats from like olives and nuts and seeds, which can improve insulin sensitivity and improve sugar control in our bodies. So nuts, olives, avocados, sunflower, and canola oil. You want to eat foods high in omega-3 fats, which is your fatty fish, salmon, tuna, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring. You can take a fish oil supplement, still not the most perfect of choices, but if you're definitely not going to eat those fish, I would take a supplement. Your plant-based omega-3 sources is going to be flaxseed and walnuts, and those are good choices as well. Herbs and spices, cinnamon, turmeric, ginger, garlic, parsley, basil, thyme, saffron, rosemary, oregano, nutmeg, cumin, cloves. All of these spices not only have nutrients that help fight cancer, but may even relate to better insulin control, glucose control, all of that kind of stuff, and along with antioxidants and cancer-fighting nutrients. So definitely flavor up those foods with all those great things. Now, other lifestyle choices, we need to exercise. We need to move our bodies. In one way, shape, or form, we need to move. Now, if you're not an exercise person, a gym rat, if you can't or won't walk or something like that, find ways throughout your day to get up and move, okay? The goal is 30 minutes daily, about 5 times a week. You can do a couple of days with actual resistance exercises, lifting weights or exercise bands or working against gravity with your own body. But exercise helps the muscles clear sugar because it's going to use it for fuel for that exercise from the bloodstream. It reduces sugar levels, reduces insulin, helps manage our weight. All of those help reduce cancer risk. So being active every day gives us more consistent benefit. A lot of times people say, well, I'll go to the gym 45 minutes or an hour 3 times a week. So, well, what's happening on the other days? Because if on the other days you're just sitting, you're not getting that consistent benefit. So maybe you do shorter days more often, or you find something else to do those days. My father-in-law, he goes to the gym maybe 2-3 days a week. I said, well, what do you do on your other days? Oh, well, I'll go out into the yard and I'll do yard work. Great, that's wonderful. Okay, so that's going to give you a consistent activity. So our goal is not to eliminate entire food groups. We don't eliminate all foods with sugar in it, okay? We just want to make better choices within all of those food groups. And hopefully the presentation has kind of cleared that up for you. So thank you very much for coming. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, or you can always call me. And thank you very much.